Welcome to today's episode of The Suspense is Killing Me. Kat Silva is back. Kat, how are you?
I'm good. I'm, I'm good.
I
How are you?
love I love this because like the repeat offender list is very selective, and it's wonderful when people say, I would love to come back. And it's usually because they did something great, like launch a new book that's doing exceptionally well amongst all of the grief horror fans.
Yes, all of us crybabies.
That's right, all of us dark, emo, closet emo kids. Undead Folk, man. Yes.
Yes,
So good. We have
Undead
some.
Folk.
There it is.
Throw it up in the.
That's the hardcover, the shiny
That's the
hardcover.
hardcover. Yep.
Random formatting question to kick off the episode because we know readers
Sure.
love these questions.
Yeah.
You did a hardback on that pretty quick. Was that a
hmm
decision specifically like a special edition type decision, or were you like intending to do that the whole time?
So here's the fun origin story of Undead Folk, which
Yes.
includes the answer to that question. So
Awesome.
I um I had this book in the back of my head for a while, and this past winter sucked, like for random things breaking in my basement, just specifically in my basement, like water heater died,
Yeah.
furnace got the whole basement flooded and the furnace got ruined and had to get fixed.
Oh,
Lost power for like a ridiculous amount of days because Maine in March is horrible, and cost me a ton of money. And so I was in need of money. This is not a good reason to create a book last minute, everybody. But because that is my only other income, I was like, yeah, screw it. I'm gonna do this book that I've been wanting to do for a while, and I'm gonna have a special copy available for AuthorCon. And so I did that. I had special hardcovers that were available only for AuthorCon because I wanted to be able to have like a full release later. I didn't think I was going to have enough time to really like
mm,
get momentum going for it by the time that AuthorCon showed up. So that's why I did hardcovers. I didn't have blurbs by then, so those are not on the hardcover, unfortunately. But yeah, so money was the reason.
interesting. I mean, you don't often see a novella with the hardcover, so I was happy to see that. I was like, oh, this is great.
Yeah, I had no idea how it was going to turn out either, and it actually turned out quite nice. Because I've only done two other hardcovers, and both had jackets.
Yeah.
This was my first laminate hardcover, so great experimentation. It looks very nice if you're thinking about doing it.
Yeah. So for people that don't understand the differences in different types of hardcovers, the case laminate is like a hard um, paperback. It's, I guess, the easiest way for me to say, because it doesn't have the jacket. And if you take the jacket off, it's not just a plain book. It's got the actual book
Yep.
cover image on the hardcover. And what an image! I mean, the the whole. I mean, maybe you can talk a little bit about how um, you had this image before you had this story, right?
Yes, that's
Yeah.
part two of things that you should not do when it comes to creating a book. And that is create your cover and release your cover without actually having written the book. So I had the idea for the book, and I knew that this was a character and a setting that was already established in my head, and that was that there would be a fox that had been brought back to life, so it was basically a zombie fox, and that it was going to take place in a dystopian world with trains being kind of the major mode of transportation. So Zombie fox on a train track was my, like, that's what my cover is. And I worked on it for maybe a day and a half in, Adobe Photo Premiere or whatever my ancient Photoshop um, software is. And then it came out just like looking awesome. And then I figured, yeah, so I'll put it up. I'll do the cover announcement once I can put pre-orders up on my website to start, and then I'll, get it going. And so then the response from the cover was huge.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, fuck.
Now I've done it.
Yeah, like now I have to write this.
Yeah.
So, but the writing process went really easily. I did that in probably a week or a week and a half, and then spent another week editing. So it went smoothly also.
Well, I love it, and it is reminiscent of some of your other cover art you've done on your series, but it stands out. It's not it's very distinguishable from the series as well. So you've got a great way of developing these covers that have depth and simplicity, and love that across your entire line of books. And I think that Undead Folk took that to another level, right?
Yeah, thank you.
Super cool. So the color scheme is unique to this book as well. The oranges and everything. Did you get that? Did you get that from the fox's natural coat color? Is that what kind of inspired that?
So I had 3 different sky colors originally. I had 3 different versions of it. I wasn't 100% on the orange sky. I had a red one, I had the orange one, and I had a purple one. And I liked all of them, but the orange sky had the best flow in the overall cover, and it had the birds, which the other 2 did not. So I kept it for the birds, and because the hot pink title popped the best against that sky.
Perfect. Well, I love it, and I think it kind of sets the tone for the story, obviously, like a lot of covers do. But I love that it's so directly related to the actual characters and the theme and feel of the book. I feel like sometimes covers they intend to do that, and other times they intend not to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're just like a cool but somewhat related cover, so that they're not lying to you, but they just want to get you to pick the book up and do something with it, and then you dive into the story and you're like, okay, that didn't really kind of line up with what I was reading. But in this case, obviously, it's exactly like what we're gonna find ourselves involved with. So another part of this book that fascinated me, outside design wise, like from a writing and publishing perspective, is how quickly you turn this story out, right?
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about like what inspired you to write this story in particular? And was this like a full-on pantsing thing? Like you had this great idea and you rolled and it was done, like, or was there more to it?
Basically, it was, I'd had the idea for the concept of Undead Folk for a while. It was originally going to be the base story in a short story collection that would take place in between other stories. And then I'm not a short story writer.
Right.
So I don't think I am, as I'm not as good as some other people. So I often avoid writing short stories and short story calls and things like that because I'm just scared of them. And so it was taking a really long time to get this concept together to do this. And finally I'm like, I have this idea. I need money. This is what I'm going to do. So originally the idea was, a witchy young woman who was riding the rails, who finds this dead fox and brings it back to life. And that's all I had going into it. But the voice for Amos kind of came out of nowhere. And just this very sarcastic, goofy
I
dad
love it.
came out of, I guess didn't come out of nowhere. I had, I had been watching, what's the name of the movie? Easy A. Really random pull, but the parents in that movie are so quick. Like they're so quick on their humor, and they're so supportive of their kid too. But I fell in love with them, and I love the idea of this middle-aged dad who's just kind of a wise ass. And that's where the idea came from to create that character like that. And then our very standoffish protagonist is very much pulled from me for the most part. And then as the story went, I was pulling a lot of mood from listening to Jose Gonzalez music, which, if no one is familiar, it's very sparse guitar, acoustic guitar, very soft voice. And it feels very derelict. It feels very very dystopian. So I got a lot of inspiration from that, and I watched a brilliant movie called Supernova, which I also pulled a lot of inspiration from concerning the plot, which I will not talk about. But if anyone has not seen that film, you definitely should see that film. It's absolutely heartrending and gorgeous, and I love it a lot.
Awesome. Yeah, I didn't know what to expect with the storyline. I kind of kept myself in the dark a little bit on purpose. I didn't ask other people, hey, did you read it? What'd you think? I was like, I'm not talking to anyone about this story until I read it. And I don't even think I read the book description. I had
all right.
I just knew that there was a dead fox in a dystopian land with a young protagonist who was having to navigate this new world, and that's it. So I was super happy to get this smart-assed kind of, to use Kev Harrison's comment about the book. He was like, man, it started out with this really jovial character, and I was like, that's a good way to put it. It really was. The fox is kind of like this. It was almost like I was asking, is this going to lead into a little bit of a comedic horror bend? It just made it so much richer and so much more. It added such a depth to the story, because it wasn't just straight up grief or straight up adventure or straight up conventional walking through. It read like a longer book because it felt like it had more depth to it. And so I think that a lot of that just had to do with this character. And then of course, and I don't want to, I'm not going to venture into spoiler land here. There's a process by which, like you said, that witchy kind of young woman has an influence on this fox. And it was really cool to have these questions as a reader as it started, like, who is this person? What is happening with this fox? All these different things, and where exactly are they going? And, what are they doing? So I always feel like when I read something that's either dystopian or post-apocalyptic, there's going to be this reckoning of a world we don't currently recognize, but we're very familiar with. And I guess I go into it hoping that it doesn't get too cheesy. I'm like, all right, are we going to get played up on too many tropes that are associated with these things? And you avoided almost all of them flawlessly. So I didn't feel like I was reading a hard dystopian. You know, it wasn't about like this tremendous amount of dystopian world building. Let's put it that way.
No, thank you.
Which,
I think a lot of that might be because I was not influenced by horror stuff when I was writing it. You know, first and foremost, I wanted it to be a character rich, character focused
right.
story with horror elements, but nothing like I didn't want it to be a full on just like apocalyptic thing.
Right. Are you well, just based off of your series and this book, you tend to deal with a lot of these kind of alternate states of being in our country, in any in our world, I guess I should say, where things aren't normal, society isn't functioning as designed. There is no predictable day. Is that kind of just like this embedded part of your writing where you just love to explore those types of open stories, or is it different than that?
What's really hard about this one in particular was that I was really driven by a sense of need when I wrote it, and I think that the kind of unconsciously went into the story, this desperation of like, if I don't do this, I don't know what I'm gonna do. And so there is this undercurrent of like desperation of people who are in need. And then just because of following the storyline, there is a lot about how, you know, terrible the medical situation in our country is, and class systems, and a lot of characters fending for themselves because honestly, you want to root for the underdog characters. You want to root for the characters that are you know, kind of roughing it, and that's I feel like it's just a natural choice when I write books. I just, you know, I want to give them some kind of justice. So also it got like crazy dark here while we've been talking because there is a storm coming.
You look great.
I don't want to throw off the lighting too much, but I might turn on a lamp because
oh, you're good, man. Do whatever you want to do.
I feel like it got very dark. Just
hey, look at that. There's a cat.
It's a little, yeah, I don't look like I'm bathed in heavenly light now.
It was so appropriate for the whole dystopian grief horror kind of vibe, though, you know?
Yeah.
Here's Kat coming to us from a time when there is no electricity.
Yeah. Well, the entire spring, early spring, that was the situation here.
Yeah. And so for those that aren't familiar, you're in Maine.
Yes.
And so when the rest of the country is transitioning into spring this year, early spring, Maine was just hanging in there, man. Yes. Enjoying that wintry.
I hated it so much because we didn't have a winter until March. Then it was like, okay, let's drop 3 feet of snow on you guys, and then it's an ice storm, so let's knock out the power for a week. And and then the basement flooded during that time because we didn't have the sump pump, and it just was a nightmare.
Love it. Hate it. It's like, it's like one of those situations where look at all this greatness. I'm going to be the optimist for a minute. Look at all this greatness that came out of this situation. We got this story.
Yeah. Yes.
Right. Yeah, we got the fox, man. We got Amos. We got this really cool story, and I feel like I'll just say this as an outsider, being someone that didn't write the story, didn't publish the story, definitely bought and enjoyed this story. I loved seeing how well Undead Folk is doing in the horror community right now, because it's atypical, right? It's not like your typical horror story. It doesn't fit neatly into a specific genre. I feel like it's cross
Mhm.
genre.
Yep.
And it's not stylized after a previously uh, um, successful book, right? Because I've read a few
No.
recently that were based on things that had happened in other literature, and they're phenomenal in their own right. But this is a purely original um, idea that came out of a time where you were obviously very influenced and motivated by the circumstances in your own life, and it comes through so well in this book.
Yeah, it's a little mind blowing still because um, it I think the length of the book too is what throws me off, or why it's doing so well a little bit. Like I know that shorter things are more digestible. They are certainly easier for people to read,
Right.
with so much of people's time being taken up with this thing and that thing and this thing and that thing. It's easier to fit smaller stories in there. What's hard is to get the right balance in that story to make it seem like it's enough of something. And there are certainly still people that I get reviews that are like, I wish I had more of this story. I wish I had more of these characters. So it's like you wanna be able to give them enough of that world, but also make it so that it's an amuse bouche, I guess. Um, and and I also think because of the particular category that I put this book into, with characters that do need uh, more of a starring role, that is also taking flight. So it's what's hard is that the category gives away a twist in the story. So I hate that I can't like talk about that.
Well, kind
Um,
of. I didn't find it predictable, but I was like, oh, okay. Like
yeah,
it fits the genre.
yeah,
Yep. I wasn't sure who exactly we were talking to. You know what I'm saying?
yeah, yeah. And
That was kind
that's
of the revelation for me.
yeah, and that's that was intended. It was a like, we're not gonna know who this character is until the story allows it.
Right.
And but it was, it's hard because you're balancing using these different terms and sentences to make sure that people don't know
Right.
who this is. And then when you get that, it's like, oh, you can go back and see where
Yeah.
the difference of, you know, dad and father, for instance, were
Right.
used.
Sure.
So
Yeah, there's some representation in this story that we don't find in a lot of typical fiction, which I found to be refreshing. And I was like, oh, that's excellent. This is good to see in these stories, because I think it sometimes becomes like a second thought when you're doing
mhm,
character development, about the additional layers that you can build on a character. And I feel like that was a very well put together part of this story, was that it felt as if there wasn't any other option. And I think that
yeah.
sometimes when it can be done egregiously, it feels forced, and this just felt so natural and good.
Well, thanks. I think
Yeah.
another part of that was just knowing the length of the story.
Hmm.
And I knew pretty early on that this was what my twist was going to be, or what
Hmm.
the story was going to be, who these characters were going to be, and how it was going to come to a head. That I, yeah, I don't know, it all came
Right.
together.
Perfect.
So,
Natural. It was organic.
yeah.
um, I did pick up on, and you mentioned this earlier in your comments, but I did pick up on this while I was reading it, that there was a bit of a reflection on the status of the healthcare system.
Hmm.
And it, I hate to be one of those people. It's like, oh, this really resonated with me because I'm a parent or whatever. But
Yeah.
um, I don't think it was until I became a parent and was considering people outside of my little world of insurances and all these things, because I was, in the military for so many years. We have a very dedicated healthcare system, and when you retire, you maintain your healthcare insurance up until you're eligible for Medicare. At that point, it shifts.
Yeah.
But one of my deepest fears for my kids, both financially and just as a human living in America, is the healthcare system. Not
Yeah.
that they won't receive decent health, but that the cost of that decent health care is so astronomical.
Yeah.
And it could literally be like life altering just to have. So was there a particular influence that brought this into the story, or is this just like a general reflection on our current situation
Um,
here in America?
I mean, yes and no. They're pretty much, I feel like every day I am seeing a GoFundMe or some kind of some sort of fundraising for something related to healthcare. And it can even be like the worst thing. It can even be like expenses for a funeral, which I think is also ridiculous.
Right.
But that is overwhelming. I see it everywhere. And the fact that we do have to rely on each other to help out with basic medical expenses or funerals or, even things like, can you get me a bus ticket to go to my father or mother, whoever who is in the hospital, things like that. It's just like, yeah, our society is broken. The healthcare system is broken, and it does weigh on you the more you see it. And then also, I have family that have had to visit the hospital this year, last year, and those medical expenses. It's ridiculous. It just
It's a lot.
it's a lot.
It's a
It's
lot.
just a lot.
it,
Yeah.
it doesn't really give you the sense that you're in a situation where it's beneficial to you. And I think that's one
No.
of the bigger problems. And not to get like political or even sociological on the topics, because it does cross. But I just feel like there's this a new awareness of how vulnerable people are over this last decade or two when
Mhm.
it comes to healthcare in this country. And I think it's just people are more aware now as the systems have matured. And I loved seeing that in your story, because I felt like it was appropriate considering its proximity to an actual event that leads us to a dystopian
Yeah.
future. So it's
Yeah.
like, how close to the edge were we when all this happens,
Yeah. And
And
it's
how,
all circumstantial too.
right,
It's just like the wrong timing for this thing to happen. Um,
right.
so
It's wild. It's wild.
it, it
Um,
is.
I, I thought it was cool that you were able to pull that into your story and use that as a part of the plot. So yeah, that was awesome. All right, so I guess my question for you about grief horror, because
Mhm.
you and I have nerded out about this before. I write grief, you write grief, we love grief, we all love grief. We're not necessarily fans of experiencing grief, but there's a
No.
deep emotional experience associated with grief horror stories. And I feel like it really anchors readers. They can get pulled in and really kind of get their feet planted in a grief horror book in ways that you sometimes can't with stories that don't have such a deep like theme associated with
Mhm.
them, or a deep emotional connection. Um, but oftentimes when you see a grief horror, what you don't see is action or adventure or
Mhm.
comedy. And there's a little bit of that sprinkled all through Undead Folk. I think that like you start out like we were talking about before with this character who's kind of jovial and fun and there's this underlying sense of grief throughout that. But as the story continues, there's action scenes, there's something to solve, there's all these great elements. So to me it's not like, I mean, it's great to describe it as a grief horror because it is absolutely founded in grief and this protagonist's experience with grief, and it's her motivator. However, it's also so much more than that, and I don't want people to get uh, to be to assume that it isn't, right. So you've got some kind of dystopian world action going on here in
Mhm.
several places. Is there something about writing action scenes that you love, because you do such a good job with them? It's like it seems to be a common theme in your books as well.
Yeah. So my roots are actually in writing action scenes.
Gotcha.
Mostly because growing up, one of my favorite writers was Michael Crichton. And his writing is all in that techno thriller genre. And it occasionally branched into horror, but he wrote action scenes that were so just like snappy quick, and they really pulled you in. And so I got a lot of my interest in writing action from him. And then a lot of it came from just watching a shit ton of movies, mostly action movies. And, I grew up on things like Jackie Chan too.
Yes, love
So,
Jackie Chan.
so my first novel that I wrote has a ton of action in it. There's fight scenes, there's car chases, there's all kinds of stuff in it. And that's because I just love writing that kind of stuff. It's hard to translate that visual into words sometimes, but there's a challenge in that I enjoy, and just trying to pull it down to its most basic parts, and make sure that people are seeing what you're trying to describe, without getting too flowery and too goofy with it.
Is that Nighttime Dotted Line?
No, no,
I haven't read that yet.
don't. Please don't. Nighttime Dotted Line is not horror. It is not action. It was a departure completely. It is a
Okay.
romance comedy that I
Oh,
wrote.
I didn't know you wrote a rom-com. That's
Oh
awesome.
yeah. Very much based on the episode from The West Wing where they all get left behind by the motorcade during
Gotcha.
the presidential, caucus stuff. So that's no. It's Vox actually.
Oh,
Vox was
Vox.
my
Okay.
first book, and it's
Okay.
it's all about vampires, and there's an ancient sect that's trying to take over the world, and it was very Vampire the Masquerade influenced.
Gotcha.
But it had all these action scenes in it that were inspired by like The Matrix and all kinds of stuff. So that's where the roots are. So every story that I write has action in it, and actually I think the further along I've gone, the less I've put action scenes in my stuff, because I've learned that if you just populate the book with too much action and not enough dialogue, then it just it's not the right balance.
Right.
So I've had to learn how to kind of meter it, and
Gotcha.
and it also has to make sense.
Sure. I just appreciated that element of the book, especially since, as we were talking about before the show, big fan of the Wild Dark, and that's been my every season I basically pick a long read. I have a bunch of different. I read about 5-6 books at a time. One of them's going to be the constant. One of them's kind of the backbone. The Wild Dark has been that for me. And one of the reasons why I chose Wild Dark for that is because it does have action.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's easy to kind of go with the pace of that story. It's got multiple timelines. It's got a lot of depth to it because of that. The now and the then, beautifully done, by the way. And by the way, you guys can go check out episode we did about the Wild Dark. But anytime you see like law enforcement characters and that stuff, you automatically think action thriller kind of deal. But man, the Wild Dark is definitely about loss. You know? And kind of navigating a new situation. And I was looking for traces of that in Undead Folk. I guess just because as a reader, I was conditioned to expect a little bit of that, but I felt like you just did such a great job of managing that in such a short book with Undead Folk. It's really cool that you were able to do that.
Thanks.
Okay, so now I've got to ask a question about the fox.
Yes.
Why a fox? What inspired you to pick a fox?
So it was always either going to be a fox or it was going to be a cat. That's, you know, I had chosen pretty early on one of those two. And a fox made more sense to me because it originally was going to be more of a like swampy, kind of the opposite of what it became. It was going to be more swampy. It was going to be more prairie, countryside, like too much water, lots of rain, lots of everything. And instead it ended up being more drought, dried out. And I don't know, that made more sense to me versus a cat. Which I tend to think of as being a little more domesticated, even though there's feral cats out there.
Sure.
And I love cats. I think there's a little bit of removal for me because if I'd had to write about a zombified cat, I might have been a little more attached to it. So it ended up being a fox, and they are, you know, I just liked the idea of this like very playful canine with a, you know, kind of rough sense of humor. And I think that fits more with that kind of animal too.
Right.
So.
I thought it was great. The reason I ask is I don't have a lot of wildlife written into my stories. And you see this is one of the common themes in your books. You're very much about environment and nature, and animals are present in your stories. And I find it fascinating to kind of see this theme continuously run through your stories. Is that because of your own personal connection with nature? Is it because you just find it irresistible to introduce the connection between humans and animals? Like, is there something to that, or just like a big fan?
I think it's both. What's kind of funny about that now is that I'm working on something that has no, like barely any nature or animals in it.
Okay.
It's very urban focused, and there's something that feels like it's missing, and I think that's because I'm not writing about animals or forests or, you know, anything else like that.
Right.
But yeah, it just kind of works its way into my stuff. And I think that is because I grew up in the countryside of Maine. I've got oceans, I've got mountains, I've got lots of forests. I have a lot of nature around me to be inspired by. I work in the outdoor industry, so I am often promoting getting outside. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I
love that you brought up the urban. Feels like there's something missing because you're so connected to that nature in your stories.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, I also love architecture. Like, don't get me wrong, I could get off on a whole other subject about how much I love writing about houses and buildings and things, but it is different because it's sort of like leaving a vacuum of all of this wilderness stuff. And now just sort of going over here and doing something totally different.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's kind of like I know that's what I'm getting ready to step into a natural kind of or a rich natural environment when I go to your stories. And this one
Mm-hmm.
starts, you know,
Yep.
uh, on a train. You know, it's funny. Your opening paragraph might be my favorite opening paragraph of the year so far.
Oh
Like,
wow.
I love it. I took a picture of it and posted it
Yeah.
on Twitter or X or whatever, and I was like, "Do you see this?" It's like, wow, what a great nail the landing in the beginning because I always worry about that for my own stuff. Like by the time I finish a chapter, I'm usually like, all right, let's just hurry and get this over with. And my editor's always like, no, I'm not letting you get out without a better closing statement than that. And then the beginning of a book, it's like, we talk about first impressions, but uh, man, is it so important with a story to nail that first paragraph. And I'm like, all right, Kat, I see you. I see what you're doing. You're gonna put us all to shame with your first paragraph.
Oh God. And when I wrote it too, I was just like, oh, this sounds so like pompous. Like like, I want it to hit, but not be like, ooh, like
Yeah,
somebody thinks they're a writer over here.
someone is
Uh,
a writer. You did a
it
great.
just it, so yeah,
Yeah,
it came out. Um,
I love it.
it was yeah, just you know, knowing that these people are basically just waiting for death was the
Well,
whole thought.
you killed it. You killed the first page. I love it. I thought it was fantastic. It immediately pulled me into the story, and I was like, "Ooh, look what I'm getting ready to get into! Like, this is cool. Like, way to kick the game off, man. It was really an exceptional opening, and it didn't have so much to do with like the part of I love about it is you took a scene that could have been rather uneventful, right? Like I've got to start this story. This person's going to be in this particular environment. It could have gone way in the other direction where the opening was just kind of like dropped into the middle of the story and off you go.
Mm-hmm.
I thought you did a really good job of kind of like setting the tone right off the bat with this beautiful prose. It was really good. Very good. Pulled the old creative writing arrow out of the bag there. It was awesome.
Oh,
Um,
thanks.
so so the pace of a story like this gets tricky, right?
Mm.
Speaking of pacing, when I mean you were talking a little bit about like short stories can be a little bit they can be more challenging to write than long fiction
Oh
for
yeah,
sure.
yeah.
The more I got into writing longer fiction, the more challenging short stories became. Um, I started out writing short stories and was intimidated by writing long fiction, even though I was a fan of long fiction. And now I find, much like you said, I find shorter stories more challenging to write because I
Mm-hmm.
think that when we write long fiction, when we write novels and longer novellas, we have so much to play with. We've got so much real estate. It's kind of like you're not constrained and you've got all this freedom. And when you're constrained by word count and all your it really kind of puts a lot of pressure on
Yeah.
character and being efficient with your writing. Did you feel I felt like the pace of this was very natural. Did you feel like you had an obligation to pace this story a certain way based on its length, or did you kind of just go into it and it became what it became?
No, I was I feel like because this was short, I was extremely intentional with a lot of things. Because it was easier to be more intentional with something shorter than it is to be when you're writing a longer piece.
Sure.
That takes a lot more time. It takes a lot more self editing, and then also because it's so long, just needing another set of eyes to be like, all right, you missed this obvious thing here. This was like, when I went into it, I'm like, okay, I don't want them to know this. I want them to know this. I want to make sure that this is a dialogue heavy book because I want the characters to carry the story. The dialogue was really important to me, so I wanted that to be like the focus in the sort of like slower parts, to just phrase it that way. And so really when we're starting the story, it kind of like goes straight through the first chapter because I was like, I want to get to the dialogue. I want to get to the dialogue. I'm like, we're being very quick about this because the dialogue is what's important. And I felt like that the entire way through the book, right up until the ending, which also kind of like mirrors the beginning. Not spending too much time focusing on details, as in just like giving you an idea of what's going on and letting you picture it, or imagine.
A little more direct.
Yeah. So yeah, that was intentional.
I loved
the whole
it.
time.
Yeah, I felt like it was a great pace for a book of that length, because sometimes when people write, what was this, 66 pages in print, I think, something like that.
It's 74,
okay.
I think, total.
Yeah, just to give people who haven't read yet some context of what we're talking about here. And I feel like sometimes people have a really good ending scene picked in a shorter piece of longer fiction like that, and they kind of have to fill the first part of the book to get to that. And so there's this unnatural pacing, and you get to the end and you're like, oh, this is what we're here for, right? Like,
yeah.
with you,
yeah.
I don't feel like that was the case at all with this. It felt like, actually, I sort of felt like the end was going to be unpredictable, and I felt like the pacing of the story never really gave me a chance to question whether my feet were moving, right? Like, I was moving through that story and there wasn't any chance to sit down.
Yeah, it doesn't allow you a lot of time to speculate. Certainly, it's
Yeah.
It's sort of a popcorn bag length book.
Awesome.
And that also was just intentional because it's meant to elicit lots and lots of sadness.
Right.
And that's, makes me sound sadistic, but really that's the whole point.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not like you're trying to hurt people.
No. Just make me cry a little bit.
Yeah, some tears. That's okay. So I'm gonna ask you the loaded question we ask every author at the closer to the end of a podcast. Read any good books lately? You got any good recs, grief or not? Just any good books lately?
I'm in the middle of reading 3 books right now, which is also something you should not do because they're big books. They're all big books. And
what were you thinking?
Yeah, it was dumb. I am currently reading Deep by Akina Lueza. I am halfway through that.
It's right here. Now. Second from the bottom in this stack.
Which is really good cosmic horror. And then I am reading Michael Tyree's new book, If These Walls Could Talk, which I'm not very far into that at the moment because I've been focusing on the other 2 books, trying to finish them. But that is a, existential grief. Well, it might have some grief in it, but it's mostly existential. I think cosmic also horror. It's a whopper. It's like close to 600 pages, I think.
Nice.
And then the last one I'm reading is Tales of the City, which is actually like a graphic. It's not a graphic novel, but it's like a book with paintings and stories in it.
Oh.
And it's by Sean Tan. And it's a really cool book about this concept of like animals just sort of being in cities alongside people in a lot of really weird, grief heavy ways. And it's been brilliant so far. There's like all of these stories, like I'm trying to think of one. There's one about how there's ghosts of horses that are, running through the cities and how they were used for all the labor of the city and then like kind of tossed aside once they died, and now their ghosts are running around the highways and the buildings and everything. And there's another one about catching a fish in the sky. These kids that catch this fish in the sky and they pull it down, and then they think that they can sell it, and it rots too quickly.
Oh.
And then they realize that like they should never have pulled it out of the sky because it was meant to live in the sky, and once it gets pulled out of the sky, it deteriorates. It's so good.
Wow.
It's really good.
It sounds deep.
A lot of like, there are some seriously deep stories in there, and there's a lot of them. There's probably like 25, 30 different ones.
So is that a collection?
It's okay. I definitely recommend it.
Wow. Very good. I guess part of the struggle when you're a writer is choosing what to read while you're writing, because it's you're going to get a little bit of that aftertaste. Is there any calculating of that? I tend to do a terrible job with that.
Well, I feel like I don't do a lot of that generally because I'm really good at like sectioning off my head from one thing to another. Mm-hmm. And if I need to pull on an influence, then I will sort of, it makes it sound like I have a mind palace and I've got little folders, and I can pull from one folder to another, and if I need to, but really I can keep things fairly separated. I think it's ironic. I will say this one is ironic. I did read Whale Fall around the time that that Undead Folk was coming out, but I didn't contribute any of that to the book because it was already being printed. But it was ironic that it's also a grief story about fathers, and it was very well done, and I enjoyed it very much. But I already had this other nugget that I was pulling from.
I still haven't read Whale Fall, and I've got the hardcover right over here.
Yep.
Picked it up at Halloween Hangover last year.
Nice.
Had a great conversation about the book, and like all the things. And I'm like, man, I've got this stack. It's it's in the same stack with Some Kind of Mother.
Nice.
Or
which
What Kind
I
of
also
Mother?
read. And I recommend both of those as grief horror novels. Really anything that Clay writes.
Oh my gosh.
Up there. But
look at that cover on What Kind of Mother. I mean,
yeah.
It's so good.
Yeah. It's another really, really good one. And it got to a point where I was reading all of these books for winter views. Because I wanted to read a bunch of them before I had guests on, including yourself. And I was like, God damn it, I bought Whale Fall because I wanted to read it and I haven't read it. So I'm just going to read it. And it was one of the days that I had no power. So I just I powered through that book with like a little flickering lantern next to me in the dark up in,
Nice.
And it was totally worth it. Enjoyed it massively.
Nice. What a cool experience with that, though.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Almost like being in a whale's stomach.
So, yeah, kind of just like that. Um, so outside of the books that you were reading around the time that you were doing this, I mean, you and I have talked about the power of music so many times, and
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned one artist at the beginning of the episode. Was there other music that was kind of in your life at that time that influenced the the production of this book?
Yeah. Fleetwood Mac has always been a big one, particularly just there's a song that is, I think it's my brain is gonna die right now.
It's okay.
Of course.
This is what happens when we ask people things like this.
I'm pulling up my playlist so that I can refer to it because I don't want to sound like a moron. My phone is also super slow.
The slow phone.
I dropped it about 5 or 6 times at the bar at AuthorCon. So and that is not because I overindulged, folks. That is because I got up from my chair and forgot it was in my lap several times. And I didn't have pockets. So let me find it here. It is
if it's Beautiful Child, I'm gonna
no.
Okay.
It is, so it's actually Stevie Nicks. It's not Fleetwood Mac, but it is Stevie Nicks, and it's Stop Dragging My Heart Around.
Oh, great song.
Tom Petty.
Yes.
That was a pretty big one, and it's like the title track on my playlist.
Yeah.
And then there was also Say You Love Me by Fleetwood Mac, which is the one, the song in question that the characters sing in the book,
right.
If anyone is wondering. And then also Janie's Got a Gun, because why the hell not? It's just the perfect song for that main character.
So good.
I wish it was Janet's Got a Gun, but it's not. So.
When that movie or when that video came out, when Aerosmith put that video out, it was on MTV nonstop because it was like a movie, it was like a kind of like a domestic noir movie kind of deal. I remember like I could see that in my mind right now because we were, the MTV generation. It was just on all day in my house growing up.
Well, there is the original version by Aerosmith, and then Steven Tyler does a cover, which is even darker and like more like sadder sounding.
Is it acoustic or?
It is acoustic, and it's really good.
Nice. I'm gonna check that out.
And that's the one that's on my playlist.
Look at that. I just got a song rec for a version of a song I've never heard. I've heard the original song a million times growing up. I never heard the acoustic version. So that's what I'm gonna go look that up and check that out. Awesome. Well, Kat, thank you so much for sharing your experience with Undead Folk. And I think we managed to do this without spoilers, which is amazing because I'm such a big, I was like, I'm not going to talk about all the details of the story because I really enjoyed it and I had questions and all these things. And I'm like, nope, not going to do it. Not going to spoil this one. Cause if you guys haven't read it yet, you need to go get it. And you can pick up copies of the book from Kat's website, which I'll put a link to her site in the show notes, but it's KatherineSilvaAuthor.com. She does sell everything from her ebooks to her paperbacks there. And you even have some hardcover special editions of your other works on the site as well.
I do. There is a limited edition hardcover of The Wild Dark
Right.
that's available, but that is a like print to order thing. So I have to order it and then get printed and have it sent here.
What's included in the special edition?
The special edition, it's an alphabet edition, so there's only 26 available. It is a new cover, new jacketed cover with a laminate cover underneath that has its own design. And then inside there are cocktail recipes, there are deleted scenes.
Oh.
The short story Orchards is included. And there's unique formatting and yeah, so all kinds of fun stuff.
Gorgeous new interior layout. That's what the site says. I believe it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Well, awesome, man. Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. I was unaware that you had a special edition hardcover of The Wild Dark, and I'm literally at the 90% mark in that book right now and just loving it. I can't thank you enough for taking the time out of your very busy life. You just launched this book. It's been doing wonderfully. You've got everyone and their mom trying to talk to you about it. And, and I'm just thrilled watching it do its thing because it's such a cool little story. And I'm sorry you had to go through what you did to get to this story and the motivations for it. But
yeah, I mean, that's art. Art is pain, or pain is art, I guess, is the, there's, we have to endure these things to eventually put something out. So
that's right. Well, I love the story. I really enjoyed it. And I can't wait to see what you do next in your publications. And are you going to be at any events coming up in the next couple of months where people might be able to see you?
So I will not be at StokerCon, though I wish I could be there. I am involved. I did an online panel moderated by Mo Moshte, which is all about grief and horror. And I'm on that panel with some amazing people. So I do recommend, if you're able to do the online for StokerCon, you should check that out. I don't have any events happening until the fall.
Perfect.
I will be at Spooktastic Book Fair in Framingham in September. I will be at ZerfCon in Cape Cod. And I will be there's a Books and Brews event in Brooklyn, New York that I'm doing. Nice. And then I will be at Merrimack Valley Halloween Book Festival.
Is this your second Merrimack?
This is my second Merrimack. Yeah.
I didn't know until I went to look at the author list for Merrimack that it was invite only.
Yeah, there's a very strategic way of applying, in that you email usually during midwinter and ask for an invite. And I do happen to know a lot of people who are on the committee that make those decisions. I was not expecting to get in. It's a lot of people that ask to be involved. So I wasn't expecting to be involved. And getting to go was really amazing. Being invited for a second year was pretty amazing because I didn't send an email this year. So
excellent.
It's my first invite without me going through the hoops to ask to get invited. So that's something.
Yeah, that's great.
And yeah, it's a fun show. I'm really excited to do it again.
Now, when I say invite only, guys, I mean for the authors.
Yes, yes. All the readers can, still come and
roll in
support
there. Yeah,
have fun.
get in there.
It's a really great day.
Yeah, it looks like it's going to be fantastic. And the first time I heard about it, I think it was a year and a half ago, and I was like, ooh, that looks cool. Of course, I'm not like right down the street, but I thought, man, maybe I'll make the trip up to this one. And then I was like, I wonder what the process is for getting an invitation, and I thought that was actually a really cool thing. So I'm glad you got in your second year at Merrimack. And guys, if you are interested in attending any of those events, please go say hi to Kat and pick up a paperback copy of Undead Folk while you're there. So. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming again, Miss Kat. You are always welcome back. You're the best, and I appreciate you sharing all of your insight about this book with our readers.
Well, thanks for having me. I always love coming and hanging out.
So cool. So cool. All right, guys, take it easy. We'll see you in the next episode.